Once again, I'd like to lead off by saying a big thank you to everyone who has joined us over at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. We've been able to partner with Vimeo, and we can talk about things in an adult way without having to worry about the childlike censors that control this platform and so many others. There are things coming down the road that nobody's talking about, and they have to do with topics that we've covered on this channel in the past. It's what they're not telling you. It's what they're not showing you that we're going to cover today. And it has directly to do with Florida. Now, who remembers the governor and many other conservatives coming out and saying, with this huge influx of people into Florida, isn't anyone worried that these people from all of these blue states are going to bring their voting habits with them? It's a big fear I've seen down in my comment section, that people are afraid, all these people coming to Florida, that they're going to somehow try to flip the state blue. Well, clearly that hasn't been the case, because for the first time in the history of Florida, registered Republicans now outnumber registered Democrats. And over the last 4 elections for governor, a Republican has always won, even with registered Democrats outnumbering registered Republicans. But keep that same line of thought and apply it to Venezuela. Wait a minute, what? Well, what's the main reason people came to Florida? 2020, all the lockdown, all of the heavy-handed control of government and the destruction of economies and the lack of freedom. That's why people came to Florida, right? Well, isn't that the story that the U.S. government was trying to tell you about Venezuela? The reason that people were fleeing Venezuela. Think of Venezuela as the north of North America now. That all of the collapse, all of the problem, all the heartache, all of the hyperinflation, all this was causing people to flee Venezuela. Well, shouldn't they have said the same thing? Wouldn't they have been afraid of Venezuelans fleeing to Colombia or Brazil or Mexico and taking their evil, terrible, horrible socialist beliefs with them? Wouldn't that follow necessarily? Nobody warned of that. But now things are changing, and things are changing very quickly in Venezuela. I'm sure many of you remember, it was only a few months ago when the price of oil started to skyrocket. Biden sent representatives of his administration down to Venezuela to see if they could deal for oil, to put more on the market. And Venezuela told him to go fly in a leap. Nuh-uh. Not going to happen. Did that huge influx of socialist Venezuelans cause problems in Colombia or Brazil? Very strange, isn't it? But the tide has turned, and it has turned in a way that is going to make a lot of people scratch their heads. Now, what was the story? What was the story? I want everyone to remember what the story was. It was evil, terrible, horrible socialism all by itself, with no outside influence, that caused the collapse of Venezuela. Venezuela just collapsed all on its own, and nobody else did anything to help it along. That was the story. And it was a big fat lie. What caused the collapse in Venezuela was U.S. sanctions and U.S. interference in their economy. They sent people, operatives from Colombia, in to denude the country of its currency, and to buy things up and to bribe people to keep things off the shelves so that they could take their pictures of empty grocery stores and then put that in the media and cause this huge hype and try to get Maduro overthrown. And there was heartache, there was shortage, there was problem. But the U.S. caused this. They used the dollar like the bully they are. And when I say the U.S., I mean Washington, D.C. Now, the opposition forces that they were trying to install, the pro-U.S. government opposition forces, have now said, okay, guess what, D.C.? You have failed miserably. Our little scheme has failed, and now they admit it. 2 May 2022. The U.S. must end its economic war against Venezuela. Wait a minute. I didn't think there was an economic war. I thought evil, terrible, horrible socialism just failed all by itself, just under its own weight. And that it wasn't a U.S. war. There was no U.S. war, Maquis. It just happened all by itself. The opposition, the people that were trying to overthrow Maduro in cahoots with D.C., have now said, quote, the U.S. must end its economic war against Venezuela. Even the Venezuelan opposition wants Washington, D.C. to ease its sanctions regime. Now, this here is a picture from right near the border of Colombia and Venezuela, the Arauca River. And they just found something in the Arauca River that should terrify everyone. Let me zoom this out here a little bit more. There we go. Jesus Chuo Torrealba, a 63-year-old journalist and social worker from the Communist Party, by the way, is a prominent figure in Venezuela's opposition. Now remember, this was the guy who was on the side of Washington, D.C. Buddy with random guy named Juan. He was Secretary General of the Democratic Unity Roundtable. Basically, that's a giant conglomeration of opposition groups. You see, there's the folks who support Nicolas Maduro, and then there's about 12 other groups that could never get on the same table. Well, they decided to try to do this, called Democratic Unity Roundtable, the leading coalition of organizations opposed to the government of President Nicolas Maduro. President Nicolas Maduro. President Nicolas Maduro. 1 million followers on Twitter, and he even says, the harsh U.S. economic sanctions imposed on Venezuela over the past 4.5 years have failed and should be eased. You see, now here's where they start to lie a little bit. In August 2017, the Trump administration declared economic warfare against Venezuela. The economic warfare actually began way back in 2014 under Obama. 2015, he cut a deal. We've covered this before. This happened Now look, Trump put his foot on the accelerator, absolutely. But this started under Obama. Torrealba told me that the sanctions have not weakened the Maduro regime, but they have helped push millions of Venezuelans out of the country. Some 6 million have now fled, the largest exodus in Latin American history. The mass departure from Venezuela is now the third largest in the world, trailing only Syria and Ukraine. Torrealba said the sanctions, the scheme, the plan to destroy Venezuela and unseat Maduro have backfired. The U.S. has blocked most of the country's oil exports and essentially cut it off from international finance. On paper, the sanctions made exceptions for the sale of food to some and medicines to some, but nearly all global companies have steered clear of the country, afraid to violate U.S. law even if by accident. The Trump administration believed, and Obama, that if you make people suffer, if you impose the politics of pain, that you will promote a general insurrection. Wait a minute. So now they're admitting everything the Florida Maquis reported. Everything I reported in 2017 and 18 was right. They literally just admitted it, and nobody is saying, hey, wait a minute. Hold on. Back up. I thought Venezuela failed on its own. I thought it was already in a state of collapse. And that it was Nicolas Maduro that was hoarding all the food for him and his cronies, and the reason there was a sanction was to put pressure on him and get rid of him. No. Absolutely not the truth. On behalf of big oil, because the U.S. wanted control of it again and had lost control of it, on behalf of big oil, the U.S. put together a plan. And it started a long time, way back under Obama, even going all the way back to Hillary Clinton was involved in this. Taking over Venezuela and securing their oil as if it were ours, and making Venezuela a client state or a renter state. And it failed. Other than what's happened recently over in Ukraine, this is, at least in our hemisphere, the biggest geopolitical miscalculation Washington, D.C. has ever made. This is an amazing failure and an amazing, stunning admission. The Maduro regime's leading figures are not suffering. Ordinary people are. There is an additional factor. The war in Ukraine has raised the price of oil. Easing sanctions could restore some Venezuelan oil to the market, slowing the global price increase. U.S. diplomats have been to Caracas for talks, and U.S. energy firms are already signaling their interest in Venezuelan oil. This was all orchestrated by D.C. Many people don't remember the Caracas riots. This goes all the way back to 1989. This is when I was in the military. In 1989, there were mass riots across Venezuela. Why? Because U.S. puppets had been installed, and they are trying to capitalize and turn Venezuela from democratic socialism to capitalism. And they began charging for things that used to be free, like gasoline. And the cost of transportation skyrocketed. People couldn't afford to go to work. And eventually they had enough. And it was mayhem. Total mayhem when they tried to make this shift. Now, this is what they found recently in the Arauca River. This is something brand new. Narco submarines are not brand new. However, this one is far more advanced than they've seen out of the cartels in a long time. It can fully submerge. It has 2 cameras. It's equipped with both diesel engines and batteries. This would be an incredibly difficult thing to stop if it were loaded with something other than drugs in the nose. Like, say, something destructive. How they were able to pull this off in the jungle, I do not know, but they're definitely getting help now. And it was, by the way, the Venezuelan authorities that stopped this, not the Colombians. The Venezuelans stopped this. This is an actual picture. It has improvised camouflage, electro-optical masts, windows, dive planes. The technology that they have been able to access now down there is frightening. This can fully submerge. Most narco submarines had to run right at the surface because they couldn't run on their own air. This one can fully submerge for a long enough period of time to go undetected for, well, enough distance to cause a problem. The North Koreans have made a huge leap in submarine missiles, submarine launched missiles. This is from 26 April 2022. Nobody's talking about this. Same thing with these yachts that they're uncovering. Many of them have secret compartments that they had no idea were there. There's not even plans. The place that built the yacht didn't even have the plans that included these secret compartments. You see, this is coming. Whether it's going to be from North Korea or from South America or from one of these yachts, they're going to seize one of these, and it's going to have had a secret compartment in it that's going to have something monumentally destructive. And it's going to go boom. Mark my words on this, but it's the question nobody wants to ask. Why didn't it work with Venezuela? Why didn't the sanctions work? Why? Psychology 101, guys. Psychology 101. Why didn't DC's heavy hand work in Florida? Why, when they decided to drop the hammer in 2020 and tell everybody stay home, do this, do that, do the other. Why didn't it work? Why didn't Florida kowtow? It has to do with culture and psychology. The culture of Floridians is very, very different than the rest of the country. A lot of people talk about loving freedom, but when it came down to the point where you had to stand up and fight for it, when it was real, Floridians stood up and fought as a culture while everybody else laid down. This is what I alleged about Venezuelans way back in 2017 and 18 when this started. I said this is going to backfire in an epic way. They have no understanding of the culture of Venezuelans. When they see themselves as being under attack by these sanctions, they are going to close ranks and they are going to say, I will rather starve as a Venezuelan than live under Washington, D.C. or some puppet government. And that's why they failed. And that's why places like Venezuela are now in the driver's seat, because they still have the oil. And people are going to be coming to them hat in hand. So I just wanted to cover this. Psychology 101. You true freedom-loving people that love it more than anything else will fight for their independence, for their freedom, for their autonomy, for their sovereignty. And the proof is in the pudding. See, a lot of places, North America, talked about freedom for a long time. But when it came down to the time to fight for it, only one place stood up, and that was Florida. And Texas to some extent. But I'll leave it there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.